Imagine discovering the remains of an ancient settlement buried on the edge of one of the world's most unforgiving deserts. For centuries, stories have spoken of a mysterious place called Ubar, a wealthy settlement hidden somewhere in the vast deserts of Arabia. Some stories describe it as a powerful and prosperous place. Others connect it with an ancient people known as letter 2bf, a Macron D. But was Ubar a real city? Was it destroyed by a catastrophe? Or did legend transform a real ancient settlement into one of Arabia's greatest mysteries? Welcome to History Uncovered, the Desert of Empty Quarter. To understand the mystery of Ubar, we first need to enter one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Rub al Khali, meaning the empty quarter, stretches across a huge part of the Arabian Peninsula. It is a world of enormous sand dunes, extreme temperatures, and very little permanent water. Today, it seems like an unlikely place for a major settlement. But thousands of years ago, this desert was connected to important trade routes. One of the most valuable products moving through Arabia was frankincense. Frankincense was highly prized in the ancient world. It was used in religious ceremonies, perfumes, and medicines. And the southern Arabian Peninsula became an important source of this valuable commodity. Caravans carried frankincense northward through the desert, and settlements along these routes could become extremely important. This is where the story of Ubar becomes fascinating. The legend of a lost place. Stories about a mysterious place called Ubar survived through Arab traditions and later writings. The name became associated with a wealthy ancient settlement somewhere in the desert. Popular accounts sometimes describe Ubar almost like an Arabian Atlantis. But there is an important difference. We should separate legend from archaeology. There is no archaeological proof for every detail found in later stories about Ubar. The legendary version may have changed over centuries. However, archaeologists did discover something very interesting. An ancient settlement in Oman became closely associated with the Ubar mystery. Its name is Shisr, the site of Shisr. Shisr is located in southern Oman, near the vast desert. Archaeological investigations found evidence that the location was connected to ancient trade. Researchers identified structures and remains suggesting that people lived and traded there. The site appears to have been particularly important during the period when Arabian frankincense was being transported through long-distance trade networks. And this created a fascinating possibility. Could Shisr be the legendary Ubar? Some researchers and popular accounts suggested exactly that. But archaeologists have been much more cautious. The evidence shows that Shisr was a real ancient settlement. What remains uncertain is whether it was actually the legendary Ubar described in stories. And that distinction is extremely important. The satellite clue. The mystery became even more famous with the development of modern technology. Researchers began using satellite imagery to examine the Arabian desert. From above, ancient traces could sometimes be detected beneath or around the desert landscape. Old caravan routes and patterns in the landscape could reveal where people had traveled thousands of years ago. Remote sensing helped researchers identify areas that would have been extremely difficult to investigate from the ground alone. The desert was no longer simply an endless sea of sand. It became a historical landscape filled with clues. And Shisr emerged as one of the most interesting locations connected with the Ubar story. The frankincense trade. Why would an ancient settlement exist in such a difficult environment? The answer may be trade. Frankincense was incredibly valuable. It was transported from southern Arabia toward markets across the ancient Near East and Mediterranean. Caravans needed places where they could stop, obtain water, and rest. A settlement positioned along these routes could become wealthy. This means that a place like Shisr did not need to be a gigantic city to become historically important. It could have functioned as a strategic trading station. Over time, however, trade routes changed. Environmental conditions changed. And settlements that once depended on those routes could decline. How could the settlement disappear? This is where the mystery becomes even more interesting. Popular stories sometimes claim that Ubar was suddenly swallowed by the desert or destroyed by a dramatic catastrophe. But archaeological evidence does not give us a simple Hollywood-style ending. Instead, the history appears more complicated. Shisr shows evidence of a settlement that experienced structural damage and changes over time. Some interpretations have suggested that geological instability may have contributed to its decline. But there is no solid evidence proving that an enormous city suddenly disappeared exactly as legend describes. The desert itself may have helped preserve the mystery. As settlements declined and trade routes changed, sand gradually covered parts of the landscape. What had once been a known trading place could eventually become forgotten. Legend vs. history. And this is perhaps the most important part of the entire story. When we hear the name Ubar, we often imagine a magnificent lost city buried beneath enormous dunes. But historians and archaeologists have to ask a different question. What can we actually prove? We can establish that ancient settlements existed in southern Arabia. We can establish that long-distance frankincense trade existed. We can establish that Shisr was an important archaeological site. But whether Shisr was definitely the legendary Ubar remains uncertain. The connection is fascinating, but it should not be presented as proven fact. That uncertainty is what makes the story so compelling. The mystery that remains. Perhaps Ubar was the name of a specific settlement. Perhaps it referred to a wider region. Perhaps later stories combined memories of several ancient places. Or perhaps the real history of Ubar is still waiting to be uncovered. What we do know is that the Arabian desert was never truly empty. For thousands of years, people crossed it. Caravans carried valuable goods across its sands. Settlements appeared along important routes. And when those routes disappeared, some settlements were eventually forgotten. The desert preserved their traces while burying their stories. Final conclusion. The lost city of Ubar is not simply a story about a city that vanished. It is a story about trade, desert survival, archaeology, and the thin line between legend and history. Somewhere beneath the sands of Arabia lie the remains of countless forgotten journeys. And Shisr gives us a glimpse into that lost world. But the question remains, was Shisr truly Ubar? We may not have the final answer. And perhaps that is what makes the mystery worth investigating. Because sometimes history does not give us a complete ending. Sometimes it leaves us with ruins, fragments, and questions. And somewhere beneath the Arabian desert, the story of Ubar may still be waiting. This is History Uncovered. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep uncovering history.